Years ago, a boy and his family lived on their corn farm just 15 minutes out of a small town, and they loved Halloween. Every year, they'd grow their cornfields to absolute perfection, and they'd also grow a pumpkin patch for the town and turn 100 out of their 300 acres into a corn maze. The maze had creepily carved pumpkins and scarecrows throughout. Kids from the high school and other townfolk would be volunteers to jump out and give you a scare or candy. It'd always be completed by the first day of October and stayed open until the 2nd of November. The boy was a simple, quiet, nice teenager who kept to himself at school, but he was rather handsome, so all the girls always flirted with him, all the popular girls. This created enemies for him, although he never cared for popularity or any of the conventional teenage desires. He only ever cared for his parents, Halloween, and his dream to become a professional holiday decorator. Having and not having those desires in a town dominated by mostly football made him a freak. The only exception was having his eyes set on a girl, one who was to him the only girl in school, in the whole town, that was beautiful. She had short black hair, circle-framed glasses, was tan, had freckles, and was just as tall as him. She always listened to music, wrote or drew stories, and was always alone. They had a couple of classes together, worked together on assignments, and passed each other in the halls every now and then. He never learned her whole life story, but he learned enough to know he liked her. Her name was Chelsea. All sophomore year, he worked up the courage to talk to her and ask her out, but on the day he was going to do it, that morning, his father died from a heart attack and he stopped going to school to help with the farm and to help his mother. Within the next 2 years, his mother went insane in her grief, claiming that the farm was cursed because, ever since his great-grandfather, every man of the house had died of a heart attack around the same age. But you can't really believe her if you knew how they ate. He was left all alone, but since he was 18, the land and the house became his. Even though he was left alone, that year he made the greatest corn maze for the town on Halloween. When working on it, though, he was visited by many family friends. At his request, neighbors came with food, a helping hand to tend to the land, and to help set up the Halloween celebration. Meanwhile, family in and out of the state only came just to see if he wanted to sell the land. Men in suits from various companies came as well. They hounded him almost every day of the week. He ignored them all as best he could, but he was slowly losing his patience. When October was close by again, the last person he'd ever expect visited him. Chelsea, all alone with a bag filled with what he could only assume from the smell was food, and she had a smile on her face and was blushing. Turns out she always liked him too, but was just afraid to talk to him. "I've been wanting to come and see you, but the farm was always swarming with people, and I am not very good with strangers or crowds." They had lunch together and had a wonderful time, and she ended up helping him with the pumpkin patch and the corn maze every day and night for the next month until it was done. When it was done, he asked her out to dinner on the night before Halloween. She said yes. Seeing how well the date went and how good it made him feel to be away from the farm and in the company of someone that wasn't trying to take his land or get in his pants for bragging rights, he decided to celebrate Halloween at her house, leaving the maze and patch under the supervision of his father's closest friend and his family. With the help of his father's cop buddies, as well as their kids who all chaperoned, the night went well for both houses. He got his first kiss, and his maze raised enough money to pay off the bills for a while. A week after that year's Halloween, the town's all-star cheerleader was declared missing and was found dead in his maze, buried partially by dirt and covered in broken, discarded pumpkins. The autopsy found that she had been sexually assaulted by multiple attackers and then murdered. Of course, the town all pointed fingers at the teenager, but the cops proved his innocence with his girlfriend and her family and many other witnesses. A year went by and Halloween came around again. However, barely anyone showed up. Disappointed and no longer in the spirit for the holiday, he canceled the maze and stayed home alone. Unfortunately, he did have visitors who came late at night. The night before Halloween, a couple of teens came to his house and they beat him to death. Halloween night, they went back to set everything on fire to rid the evidence from both of their crimes. After a week of searching, the police finally figured out that the now missing jocks had gone to the maze Halloween night, and they found what was left of them and their crimes. They had been torn to pieces, and their limbs were found inside the once happy pumpkins that now had sinister faces and mouths and were covered in human blood. The authorities thought it to be a serial killer after they all saw a scarecrow with a bloody smile, boots, and claws covered in blood standing before them. They were going to give chase, but it, roared at them, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth covered in blood before disappearing into the night. They searched the entire land with dogs, even a helicopter, but nothing was ever found. There was a funeral for the boy, the cheerleader, and the jocks, all closed caskets, of course. The police never linked the jocks to the cheerleader, and they never bothered to clear the boy's name, whom of which they now suspected was the killer. Instead, they chalked up a story that would please the town and their votes for the sheriff. The story is as follows. The farmer boy had killed the cheerleader the night before Halloween after inviting her over, and the jocks went and got themselves killed, committing vigilante justice. Heroes is what they were called. Every year the patch and maze is always made and is always taken down at the exact same time and manner as before. Yet, Chelsea nor her family do anything to make this happen. She doesn't have the heart to bring herself to do it without him. No one believes her though, and everyone thinks she does it for attention. Ever since then, year after year, members, lawyers, land developers, and many townsfolk all went to the farm and tried to take it, but he left it in Chelsea's name. Lawyer after lawyer that set foot on that farm never left it. They were all found in the same condition as the jocks. The cops kept it secret as best as they could to prevent a panic of a serial killer on the loose, but people are people, and people talk. Legends and rumors started, and then began the yearly dares. Every year, cocky teenagers trying to prove their manhood go missing, and the cops are too afraid to look for them. Soon, the town became quiet, and only the stubborn, stupid, or the heartbroken stayed. Only one person has gone to the farm and made it out unharmed. Chelsea. One thing that I find hilarious about this time of year is that there's no actual pumpkin in pumpkin spice. The spice combination itself is a derivative of a pudding known as pumpkin. Pumpkin itself does not contain pumpkin either. Sometime in the 13th century, someone called a pudding pumpkin, and through 800 years of a telephone game, we have gas station coffee being sold for an extra $1 and being called pumpkin spice. I must look like an antisocial prick when I break from the social norm and order a venti caramel macchiato. I'll stand in line at the local Starbucks and wait to order the same cup of coffee I've ordered every weekday morning since I started working this crappy desk job. Everyone in front of me will order some variation of pumpkin spice only for the barista to look at me like I just dropped a turd in the coffee pot when I ask for something different. It's always the same ordeal. Some kid with a liberal arts degree that ended up slinging caffeine to attempt to make a dent in their student debt ends up trying to upsell me into a pumpkin spice latte. This year seems especially bad. Everyone is eating pumpkin spice cookies and dipping them in their pumpkin spice coffee only to walk around with pumpkin spice body spray as they burn pumpkin spice incense. It's reached a point that I honestly can't help but hope some catastrophic storm would simultaneously hit New Guinea and India, leaving the world completely devoid of nutmeg. I'm getting ahead of myself though. So, 50 years ago, some idiot got it in his head that he was going to revitalize downtown by hollowing out some of the buildings that surrounded the old courthouse and turning them into an office complex. If you walk around on the sidewalk, you'll see a bunch of cute little shops and chain restaurants, but upstairs, the entire block of buildings has been turned into a cubicle farm, where I have ended up, assigned to Unit 355. My desk and work area is a 5-foot by 5-foot box with just enough room for a desk, a few filing cabinets, and an office chair I am convinced was designed by Marquis de Sade. Every weekday from 9 in the morning until 5 at night, I am expected to spend a third of each day sifting through expense reports and customer invoices looking for errors. Sounds boring, right? Wait until you've been doing it for 10 years. Last year, our employer realized my job could literally be handled by software, and my job description went from actually looking for errors to making sure the software they dropped an easy $1 million on was actually doing its job. I literally get paid to sit in my cubicle and watch a computer do the job I was hired to do. Even though I work in a position that could best be described as redundant, I am expected to spend all that time keeping a keen eye on the screen. Managers walk the rows of cubicles like prison guards looking for anyone dumb enough to check their Facebook or browse Reddit on the job. Even if they tried, the corporate firewall is more restrictive than an overprotective mother in a bad neighborhood. My cubicle is of particular interest to these middle managers who only exist to drain anything that resembles fun out of our lives. Last week, someone sent out an email to the entire floor that said Milo, the manager with a heart of shit, had been using the 5-minute break he had after doing a walkthrough through the cubicle farm to duck into the manager's bathroom to rub one off while reading a copy of Mein Kampf. As much as I'd like to take credit for the email itself, I had nothing to do with it. Still, seeing as I was the only office worker without a paper pumpkin tacked up to my cubicle, I was the first person they descended on. If it wasn't bad enough that I have to sit here and pretend I give a shit about these invoices and reports, I have no less than 3 failures of a human evolution peering over my shoulder at any given time to make sure I'm not sending malicious emails. It didn't come out of nowhere. Last month, they opted to replace the half-and-half creamer in the break room with this off-brand pumpkin spice they had bought in bulk. I can't stand the stuff personally, so I opted to drink my coffee black. Well, that didn't sit well with the overlords, so the following week they replaced the coffee itself with pumpkin spice. Realizing I couldn't get an inch of headway with those control freaks, I opted to bring a thermos with me to work. When they finally banned outside food or drink from the office, I ended up writing an open letter to management asking if we had recently been sponsored by the nutmeg industry and if they'd like some actual work to be done alongside their pumpkin spice enemas. I received my first write-up in 10 years and was told another infraction would result in my termination. Even though I didn't author the email that called out Milo, they made no secret about the fact they wanted me gone after that whole debacle. If that wasn't bad enough, I had to spend 8 hours a day surrounded by an office staff that had started consuming nutmeg like it was going to enlarge their breasts and grow their dick by 3 sizes. I had reached the point personally that I was smuggling bottled water in my briefcase and refilling it in the bathroom sink. This all came to a head when Debbie, a senior citizen who may well have been older than the building, decided she was going to have a party in the break room to commemorate her exit from the company after 35 years of employment. I'll let you guess what the flavor of the refreshments were. Attendance was mandatory, which meant I couldn't use my lunch break to buy real food. I had to stand there among 100 other hungry employees, all clamoring to get a piece of pumpkin log or perhaps an orange and black cupcake. If it wasn't bad enough, I was being forced to sit in this clusterfuck of forced socialization. It was Casual Friday. Everyone had come to work dressed in their Halloween costumes. I tried so hard not to snicker when Milo showed up dressed like a soldier. All he was missing was the SS insignia and the armband. Attendance was mandatory, but that didn't mean I had to consume any of the junk they had provided. As the rest of the staff filed through the line to get their fix, I stayed in the back of the break room and sipped tap water from a coffee mug in an attempt to blend in. Thankfully, the whole ordeal was over within the hour and I was allowed to return to my desk. Milo goose-stepped through the aisles with no appreciation for irony as I pretended to give a shit about the data being splayed across my screen in rapid succession. Roughly an hour after lunch was when I noticed Sean, a guy who worked 3 units down the row from me, stumbling through the aisle clutching his temples like he'd been kicked in the head. Before long, I noticed that even Milo had gone from goose-stepping about to standing in the corner clutching his head. I stood up and peered over the walls of my cubicle to see everyone in the office was grabbing their head in some form or fashion as their moans and groans erupted into a chorus of discomfort and pain. Debbie was the first one to start laughing maniacally at her desk. I looked over to see she was using the stapler on her desk to fire staples into the air while giggling like a child who had just discovered they had toes. Sean stumbled over to the coffee pot and poured himself a drink, while Milo staggered over to Debbie and shouted,
"That's enough, Debbie!"
Debbie kept laughing as she turned her stapler toward Milo and said, "Pew pew pew!" as she fired the tiny pieces of metal into Milo's general direction. Milo responded by ripping the stapler out of her hands and drawing back to slam the base of the stapler against her face. A random coworker started to scream as Milo repeatedly bashed the same piece of metal into Debbie's skull. The screams erupted into a cacophony of fear as Sean turned around to throw his coffee into Milo's face. Milo responded by turning around and taking a bite out of Sean's shoulder before chewing the chunk of flesh he'd torn away and swallowing with an honest-to-God smile on his face. I had no desire to stick around for the clusterfuck that was developing, and threw any personal belongings I thought important enough to keep into my briefcase before ducking down and moving down the aisle of cubicles. Annie, the girl in the cubicle directly adjacent to mine, had taken to writhing around on the floor with a stuffed animal between her legs while repeatedly shouting, "Oh yeah, fuck me, Tibbers!" I broke into a jog only to find Kyle, another middle-aged manager who had come dressed like a pirate, waving his plastic sword around and shouting,
"Arg me hearties!"
The exit door was blocked by 2 coworkers, Jane and Tom, humping each other like teenagers as Jim, the guy who worked in the supply closet, stood over them, pulling his pud. I turned around to see the entire office had devolved into random acts of sex and violence, and realized I'd have to wade through a sea of crazy to make it to the main door and out into the street. There were 6 rows of cubicles between myself and freedom. Each step consisted of avoiding some different coworker losing their shit, like someone spiked the punch bowl at the loony bin with acid. Star, a 20-year-old temp worker filling in for Sharon while she was out on maternity leave, was using an X-Acto knife to carve words into the back of a very dead Andre while saying, "Dear Diary, today I found out Andre was planning on asking me to marry him." As I tried to shuffle past her, she swung the small knife toward my ankles and shouted, "Go get your own pen!" I looked down to see the blood from the X-Acto knife had splashed onto my khakis and tried to step over Megan, the intern, as she crawled on the floor picking nits of debris out of the carpet and shoving them into her mouth. With 1 row down, I realized I was only going deeper into the abyss as I peered over to see the path was blocked by the mail cart and that Kevin, the mail guy, was using his scan gun to bash Mark, the manager's skull, while screaming incoherently. I made it 3 cubicles down the aisle before I felt someone latch onto my shoulder and tackle me to the ground. Leslie, a woman I had talked to once or twice around the water cooler, had jumped onto my back and said, "Do you think I'm pretty, William?" Her gums were bloody and she was missing her front teeth. Blood and saliva dripped onto my face as I threw her off me and stumbled to my feet shouting, "Fuck off!" Leslie curled up into a ball and screeched like a howler monkey. At the end of the aisle, I found Jessica cowering in her cubicle. Unlike the rest of the crazies, she seemed to be genuinely scared. I reached over to tap her on the shoulder and she jerked away. I attempted to speak over the roaring chaos that surrounded us and said, "Come with me, I'm getting out of here." Jessica grabbed my outstretched hand and we moved down the row a few paces before Kyle came running towards us with the blade from the paper trimmer in his hand. I jumped to the side as Jessica attempted to move around him, only to meet the blade as Kyle brought it down hard into her skull. With the blade stuck, he tried in vain to pull it from her skull as I pushed past him and towards the exit. No sooner than I had passed him, he shouted,
"I'll have your head, William."
I rounded the corner on the last row and found Milo, stripped down to his boxers and sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the bodies of our co-workers as he slapped his hands repeatedly against the bloody corpses and shouted,
"Look, Mommy, I'm a drummer."
I made it to the exit door and pushed against it, only to find someone had chained it shut from the outside. I kicked the door as Kyle rounded the corner with Jessica's head still attached to the blade. Milo smiled at Kyle, who proceeded to bash Milo's face in with Jessica's severed head until it dislodged from the blade. Faced with no exit and nowhere to go, I threw my briefcase at Kyle and broke into a sprint down the aisle and around the corner into the row along the far wall. With nothing else to lose, I took the last few steps knowing I was about to collide with the window. I jumped through the metal and glass to fall down onto the sidewalk below. I landed on my back, but thankfully my fall had been broken for the most part by a folding table one of the vendors had set outside. I peered up to see Kyle standing at the window. He threw his blade down at me and it bounced off the concrete before clattering to a stop beside me. I did a double take and he had disappeared back into the chaos. It wasn't long before the court square was packed to the brim with police cars and ambulances. I sat with a paramedic as they prepped me for a trip to the emergency room. I peered out the window as I was taken to the hospital and noticed that several of my coworkers had started charging the police. I heard gunshots in the distance as the paramedic in the driver's seat turned on the siren and drove off into the city. My cousin Ethan and I grew up together, but I never liked him very much. His family was rich, so he always had the best stuff. Mine wasn't. I didn't. On Halloween, 1985, we were going trick-or-treating together. I was the Terminator, he was Freddy Krueger. His mask cost almost $100, and it looked exactly like Freddy's face. The scars, the sneer, everything was just right. I didn't have a mask. My parents couldn't afford one. I had torn aluminum foil taped to the side of my face. It was meant to look like the Terminator after some of its skin had been ripped off. A few splotches of ketchup on the foil were supposed to look like blood. As soon as it dried, it looked very little like dried blood and very much like dried ketchup. Despite my terrible costume, I was still excited to trick-or-treat. We didn't have candy very often at home, except maybe on Easter. My parents encouraged me to go to as many houses as I wanted to get all the candy I'd be able to eat. It felt good to know they wanted me to be happy. Ethan and I went out at sundown and visited house after house. Every time the homeowners would gush over Ethan's mask. They'd tell him how scary it was, how realistic. Then they'd turn to me and ask who I was supposed to be. I'd answer and they'd say something like, "Oh, of course. How could I have missed it?" I could tell they felt sorry for me. One even handed me an extra few pieces of candy. When we were done, our pillowcases stuffed with treats of every sort, we began the long walk home. As we went, Ethan rooted around in his bag of loot. I could hear him grumbling and complaining through his mask. Then he started throwing candy on the street, stuff he didn't like.
"Go ahead and pick it up if you want it, Bill,"
he called out, heaving handful after handful into the gutter.
"I know you can't afford to let anything go to waste."
I didn't say anything, but I reached into my pocket and pulled out the lighter and one of the 2 cigarettes I'd stolen from my dad. I'd been smoking on and off for the last few months, and even at 13, I knew it was bad for me. I just didn't care. It made me feel good. I stayed a few steps behind Ethan as he tossed more candy away, and as much as I hated myself for it, I ended up picking a few pieces off the ground and putting them in my bag. Ethan caught me once and laughed.
"You're going to be as fat as your mom if you eat all that."
I kept my mouth shut.
Is that why she got fired from the restaurant? Did she eat a customer's food?
I knew Ethan was joking. He did it often. I'm sure in his mind he thought he was being harmless and playful. Still, I'd told him more than a few times to leave Mom out of the jokes. She had diabetes, and she hadn't mentioned it to anyone other than my dad and me, but the doctor told her she might end up losing her foot. That's why the restaurant let her go. She couldn't walk around and wait tables anymore. "Change the subject, Ethan," I said. I knew he heard me, and he didn't talk for another minute or so, until he did again.
You think her and your dad still fuck? I wonder how he manages to get it in there. Heh.
He cackled, then insisted.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm done. Promise.
I seethed as we took a shortcut through the elementary school soccer field.
Let's stop here for a minute,
Ethan said. We'd gotten to the school's playground.
I bet I could scare the shit out of some kids if they come by.
He sat on one of the swings with his pillowcase on his lap. He kicked his legs and the swing moved back and forth. I stood there, hating him. "I think I see some kids coming over the hill," I told Ethan. "I'm going to hide behind the slide and sneak up on them if they come over to you."
Go for it,
Ethan told me, his voice deep and distorted through the mask. I left Ethan on the swing set and walked over to the slide. I watched him swing as his hateful words rang in my ears. Tears came to my eyes as I remembered Mom smiling from her spot on the couch as she encouraged me to go out and have fun. She was such a good person. So good. She'd never said anything negative about Ethan. In fact, she'd always complimented him on his grades and his wins in basketball and even his looks. "You're going to be a handsome man, Ethan," she told him. "I bet we'll see your face in a magazine someday." Even after her kindness, Ethan still felt it was okay to trash her. I heard him laughing to himself from across the playground. I didn't know why exactly, but I had a pretty good idea. I reached in my jacket for the other cigarette, knowing the smoke would calm me down, but it had come apart. My pocket was full of loose tobacco and paper. Loose tobacco, paper, and the lighter. Ethan was still laughing as I fingered the lighter in my pocket for a second, then pulled it out. I walked up behind him. He didn't know I was there as he shouted out,
"Okay, one more thing, and I'll never say anything about her again. But unless your dad's got a big dick, he'll never manage to."
I flicked the lighter near the back of Ethan's neck, right where his hair and the mask met. The hair went up quickly, using his hairspray as an accelerant. Then something happened that I didn't expect. The mask burst into flames. Ethan jumped off the swing and ran in a loose circle, trying to pull the mask off his head. I saw it ripping under his fingers. He couldn't get a grip. The material bubbled. His screams, barely muffled as the molten chemicals clung to his skin, echoed off the brick walls of the elementary school. After a few seconds, he fell and rolled around on the playground, pushing his head into the sand to put out the fire. And he succeeded, but the damage was done. He turned over on his back, no longer screaming, but gasping in shallow, hyperventilated breaths. In the moonlight, I saw the mask was completely fused to what remained of his skin. One of his eyes had apparently burst, but his other darted around almost like he was confused and wondering where he was. I saw something moving on the other side of the field. Kids were coming. I yelled at them to call an ambulance, and I waited, unsure of how I felt, until the paramedics got there. I took complete responsibility for setting Ethan on fire. I said I'd been sneaking up to scare him by flicking the lighter near his face. And yes, I got in a lot of trouble, but everyone believed it was an accident. Ethan's face was destroyed. He had skin grafts and bone grafts and all sorts of reconstructive surgery. He never recovered. Not physically, not emotionally. He killed himself in 1990. His parents held a very expensive funeral. I was invited. They'd forgiven me for my part in his accident years before. In fact, their subsequent lawsuit against the mask company is the reason why Halloween masks are now made of flame-retardant materials. Mom died a few years before Ethan, but not before complications from her diabetes took her left leg. Dad and I were with her in the hospital at the same time Ethan's parents were there to see him through another round of reconstructive surgery. They visited Mom, Dad, and I while Ethan was still under, recovering after a successful set of grafts. We chatted for a little while about Mom's hopes for recovery, and then the topic moved to Ethan. Ethan's mom was gushing about a plastic surgeon that had recently joined the hospital after working in Switzerland. He was the best, apparently. He'd taken on Ethan's case earlier in the year, albeit remotely, and wrote a substantial article about the new techniques he'd be employing. In the world of plastic surgery, it made a big splash, if only for its ambition. Ethan's mom reached into her purse and pulled out the publication. She flipped it open to the page that showed various photographs of Ethan's burns and the notes and explanations the surgeon had written to accompany the article. I could tell Mom was holding back tears. I knew why, too. Her eyes met mine, and she couldn't hold back any longer. She began to weep. Dad and Ethan's mother held her while she cried. I just watched. Mom was thinking that she'd been right all those years ago. She'd been right for all the wrong reasons, but right nonetheless. Just like she'd predicted, Ethan's face had finally made it into a magazine.
They woke me up, the goddamn bastards. First good night of sleep I've had in years, and they woke me up. I knew they'd come, but this soon? Risked a peek through the window. The street down there was trashed from the previous night. Candy packages everywhere, toilet paper rolls, pieces of candy. God damn it, those kids!
It's a small town, you know? Very small. The kind of town where you'll get angry looks from overprotective parents if you refuse to take part in this pathetic little ritual of theirs. The kind of town where they'll question whether you're good enough to be a teacher if you won't participate in this senseless tradition of feeding sugar to their greasy infants once a year. The thought of it makes me want to puke. Trick or treat? Yeah, right. Extortion is what they call it in courts. I've refused to take part in that nonsense. Look at them. Grown men and women, some still wearing last night's costumes. I bet they get off leaving the house like that. Todd Jacobs is dressed like a vampire. Wow, real creative, Todd. Hannah Mitchell's is some colorful-haired character from some stupid superhero movie. She was crying now, and the mascara rolled down her face. Heh, funny. Someone spotted me watching through the window and threw a rock at it. The glass shattered. They were screaming their lungs off. This was serious. Oh boy, I hate this town so much. They punched the door, more of them arriving at each second. 20 of them, no, 30. Was that the sheriff? The door would give any time now. All because I didn't want to take part on their precious tradition. All because they couldn't accept that someone was different. I ran into the basement just as the door fell. That mob of senseless monsters got in. I opened the fridge and picked up the beaker glass. It looked like water, with a tiny bit of smoke floating around in it. I could feel my shirt moving as my heart pounded beneath it. Yes, I've refused to take part, refused to even open the door to those spiteful children. I refused last year, and they made me pay for it. This time, though, I had learned my lesson. I did it. I took part, but still, here they were, angry, mad, crying. They stormed the basement just as I emptied the beaker. My whole body trembled as I was suddenly shaking on the floor. You're not supposed to take so much at once. You gotta take a very small dose. This way, it will take about 6 hours before acting, but when it acts, it's a matter of seconds. Small doses, just like the ones I slipped inside the candies. Have you ever wondered why some windows in Vermont are portrait-style windows, but they're angled diagonally so that the long edge of the window is parallel to the roof? These windows are found almost exclusively in Vermont, hence their moniker, Vermont window. Raised dormer windows, which can leave a room very cold, are unusual in Vermont, where retaining warmth in winter is paramount. When a house is expanded on or built, there is often very little wall space in which to put a window, so the solution is to rotate the window until its long edge is parallel to the nearby roofline. This way, not only is the window area and any incoming light maximized, but building or buying a custom window is avoided. All of that aside, Vermont windows is not what the locals refer to them as. Instead, we use the term witch window, and will jokingly tell out-of-state visitors that witches can't fly their brooms sideways. The visitors will nod and laugh and then go purchase a gallon of local maple syrup without a second thought about the weird little architecture design. Too bad we locals can't forget about them. See, the windows weren't made to keep witches out. They were made to keep witches in. My sister Jane was a witch, and our parents used one to trap her inside. She couldn't escape through the window, but she could have enough sunlight and fresh air to keep her from going completely insane. I remember how Jane's pretty raven hair, such a striking contrast to the blonde hair of the rest of our family, would hang in greasy clumps when she would be locked in her room for days on end. Our parents would let her out occasionally to use the outhouse or to eat, but she wasn't allowed to speak or look anyone in the eye. It was an accident that caused her to be branded as a witch. She was only 6, but had been walking our dog Cookie in a storm because Cookie had to go potty. Everyone hated that dog, mainly because he was a terrifying lump of flesh that would as soon bite you as look at you. Our father insisted on keeping him around as a guard dog from bears and mountain lions, and he made us take him out to go potty. That fateful night when Jane was outside, her teeth chattering from the cold New England rainstorm, a stray bolt of lightning struck the dog. It fried him, and when Father came out to see what the screaming was about, he rounded on Jane, smashing his fists into her face. He called her horrid names while accusing her of witchcraft and being the devil's own whore. She was confined to her room, and for the first week, she was kept in shackles. Mother had doctors come from as far as Boston to see if they could cure her of her evil ways, but none succeeded. Next, our brother Timmy, only a babe, died in his sleep. Of course, that was Jane's fault too, according to Father's lectures to me. He beat her more that night, and that time he broke her ribs. I tried to stop him from hurting my sister, but being a 7-year-old girl meant that there was nothing I could do to stop a fully grown man. He brushed me off like I was an insect, and he told me that if I ever tried to interfere again, he would beat me too. That was the first time Jane didn't get fed, and that night I snuck out to bring her food. Per usual, her door was bolted from the outside, and to be extra safe, it was padlocked with a key that only Father had. I didn't need a key though, since I knew another way. I quietly snuck outside and used the apple-picking ladder to get up to Jane's window. I broke off pieces of a few pilfered dinner rolls that I had been able to stuff into my apron pockets, and there were tears in my eyes as I watched Jane drag herself over to the window from her bed. Even in the dim moonlight, I could tell from her body language that she was hurt badly, but I couldn't see much of her through the small, slanted window. She reached a small hand out to me, and the only sound that broke our silence was her ragged breathing. I tried to talk to her, but she didn't answer. Her hand just kept coming out again and again until the bread was gone. That was how the next few years passed. I turned 10, then 12, then 15. Jane never spoke to anyone again, but each night I faithfully snuck her out food. I had noticed long ago that the hand coming out of the window never got bigger, and I knew that years ago Father had unchained Jane's door and gotten rid of everything in the room, but I kept doing it because it was the only way that I could get my beloved little sister to eat. Halloween night. For many people, it beats the Super Bowl, Christmas, and New Year's combined. As a kid from the suburbs, personally, I wasn't really a fan. I had nothing against the holiday itself, but when you grow up seeing CSI murder scenes on every lawn come October, it becomes a little too morbid. This year was the first time in as long as I can remember I was actually excited about the holiday. I had just turned 21 a month before and had roommates who drank like fish. With a major holiday around the corner, it meant one thing: we're getting sideways. My excitement had another reason: a girl named Liz who I had gotten close with and had developed quite a crush on, was a Halloween fanatic. She told me she was going to the same bar as I was with her roommates dressed as a biker game. I'll let you guess what show. I had been crushing on her for a long time, and after much thought and encouragement from my roommates, I decided this was going to be the night I asked her out. It was 9 at night when me and my roommates finished getting ready. Jack, a 6'1" avid swimmer, was wearing a flannel, thick glasses, and had written, "I chopped wood before it was cool," on the blade of a fake axe. Hipster or lumberjack, he called it. Dave, 6 foot and skinny, was wearing dirty jeans, a white t-shirt, and a trash can on his head. White trash. Finally, John, a 6'3" former football player, was wearing regular clothes and a sign around his neck that said, "Nudist on strike." My costume was a robe, a wand, and a football helmet. Fantasy football. We piled into a cab after pre-gaming with a 30 rack and made the 5-minute drive to Teddy's on the Rocks. It was a big building with a square bar in the middle and a stage on the opposite side of the entrance. We went through the double doors and straight to the bar. I pulled out my cell phone and texted Liz to see when she was showing up. Right as I put the phone back in my pocket, the doors swung open. Speak of the devil. There was Liz and her roommates, all leather, jeans, and attitude. They saw us immediately and made their way through the crowd. We all said our hellos and regular pleasantries before jumping into conversation. The entire time, Liz was standing close enough for me to catch a whiff of her perfume every time she turned her head. Now or never. I asked Liz to go outside, and she followed me out to the back patio. We talked a bit more before I had the courage to pull the trigger. What do you think about going out sometime?" I asked her, heart in throat. She cocked her head to the side. "Excuse me?" I stammered. You know, like, going to dinner or something." She smiled at me. "Are you asking me on a date?" I took another deep breath. "Well, yeah." There was the longest pause of my life. Liz grinned. Then she burst out laughing. "Oh, Mike, that's so cute. You honestly think you have a shot with me?" A pit formed in my chest. What? She tilted her head back and roared with laughter. "Come on, Mike. I'm at least an 8. And you? Well, you're a 4 if I'm feeling generous. It would never work, but it's so cute that you think it would." She cackled her entire way back to the bar. I stood stupid with my heart, stomach, and jaw on the floor. I went back inside the bar. Was she drunk? That was not the Liz I had become so close with. I had no idea what had gotten into her. Me and her used to make fun of girls like that. The only things I knew for certain is one of my closest friends had finally shown her true self, and I was going to get blackout drunk. I sat at the bar, slamming back shot after shot of high-proof whiskey. The laugh was the worst part of it. I'll admit I'm not the best-looking guy, but still. I was motioning towards the bartender to refill my empty shooter for the I don't know what time, when I looked up from my empty shot glass. Clear across the room, she was there, leather arms wrapped around Jack's neck. The two kissing on the middle of the dance floor. They paused for a minute so she could put her head next to his bicep. She looked me dead in the eyes and winked. Jack knew I liked her. 2 betrayals in one night. I was on a roll. I got up and left the bar. It was only a 30-minute walk back to the dorm, and the beer-whiskey combo was keeping me warm, if nothing else. I wanted to pull up my phone and call Jack to curse him out, but After patting my pockets, I realized I had left it at the bar. To add insult to injury, as I was going up the hill to my building, trying hard to hold back puke, I heard the sound of breaking glass. A bottle exploded in front of me and a car rushed by with the driver screaming,
Asshole!
I got back to my dorm and went straight to the bathroom. I closed the door and just stared at the mirror for a bit. Asshole. The driver was right. There were other words I was calling myself, but that one seemed to fit best. I stared at myself in my costume. I looked ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I ripped everything off with angry fists as I slid down onto the bathroom floor. That's when I heard the front door open and the voices, Jack and Dave's, to be precise.
Fuck him, dude. He's a loser.
Jack said.
Can't believe he actually thought he had a chance. Haha.
Dave responded with a laugh. I wanted to get up and scream at them, but I just didn't have the strength. I heard them grab something, and with a slam, they left the room. For the first time in years, I cried. I know, men don't cry, but men get the girl. Men surround themselves with loyal friends. I was shooting 3 for 4 fake best friends. I admitted what I truly was. Nothing. I had checked out. Player 1 has left the game. Cash in your chips and go home. That was how my Halloween night went, until I finally had the intelligence to just pass out. I woke up the next morning on the cold bathroom floor. I got up and sulked out into our common room to see John lying on the couch. He looked up at me and smiled.
You dropped this at Teddy's,
he said while sliding my phone across the coffee table.
Don't be mad, dude, but Dave got wasted last night and said things,
he added with a half grin. Yeah, I heard him talking, I said bitterly. Please tell me I at least still have John. I picked up my phone and saw the green light flashing. I had new text messages.
Dave asked out Holly and she said yes. He was so happy he ended up talking to Liz for a bit. Dude talked you up like you cured cancer,
he continued. I opened up the text on my phone. 2 new messages from Liz. The first was, can't come down tonight. Jen's having a crisis. Stop by the room later. The second message said, we really should talk tomorrow. Lunch? I was so enraged. I was going to smash my phone on the floor until I saw another text. There was a collection of where are you messages, all from the guys and Liz's roommates. The message I focused on was from Dave.
Got your back, dude. Just call me Bro Sidon, king of the Broshin. Fuck yeah, America.
I stared at the message written in fluent drunkenese, too angry to think. I fucking heard Jack and Dave come in last night making fun of me. Liz fucking laughed in my face when I asked her out. What kind of sick shit is this? John lifted himself off the couch with a concerned and confused look.
Dude, Liz didn't go out last night. She was doing damage control boyfriend crap with Jen. Also, Dave never came back to the room. We went straight to their room after the bar and he stayed the night.
There's no way. I remembered everything. The fight, the laughing, the bottle.
We went looking for you at the bar, but Jack left early and said he saw you walking up the hill. We figured you went to bed or something.
The door opened and a smiling, still drunk Dave stumbled in.
Well, if it isn't Disappearo,
he said with a laugh. I went to say something, but he cut me off.
Dude, Liz likes you likes you. Giggling Japanese schoolgirl crush likes you. Better get your ass looking presentable. Your blushing bride wants a sit down.
He laughed again and went into the kitchen. John shook his head.
In case you don't speak Ozzy Osbourne, Liz likes you back.
I just stood as stupid as I had the night before, as I thought I had the night before. I heard you and Jack, I muttered. This all made no sense. I heard them. I saw them.
Where is that motherfucker anyway?
Dave asked as he stumbled towards Jack's room, mug of coffee firmly in his hand. I stood stunned. What had happened? This had to be a prank, one of Dave's twisted jokes. My train of thought was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. A few weeks ago, Jack was doing research on local legends for a paper. One of the stories he came across was called The Spirits Game. Story was, every year on Halloween, the dead would rise and freely roam the earth. Some of the more malevolent ones would invite the still living to play a game. It was simple. You won if you made it through what would be one of the worst nights of your life. Winners get everything they personally wish for and a lifetime of happiness. Losers joined the dead. The spirits would use hallucinations, false memories, and psychological torture to try and expand their ranks. After Jack explained the rules, Dave and John agreed, "Fuck that." I thought for a moment and said, "You know what? I think I'd give it a try." Jack nodded.
Yeah, me too.
That memory was playing over and over again in my mind. In front of me, John frantically shook a dead Jack. Vomit covered his flannel shirt and his skin was ash gray. Dave was down the hall, screaming and pounding on the RA's door. I stared at the body of my friend, my loyal to the end friend. A half-empty bottle of vodka laid on its side, mixing with a turned-over bottle of Percocet. Jack had just as bad of a night as I had, but while I was lying down on the bathroom floor, he decided to self-medicate. On the floor of his bedroom, liquor mixed with the pills the same way it did in his stomach. Player 2 has left the game. Last Halloween at 11:25 p.m., the doorbell rang. I'd just gotten to bed. Thinking I could ignore it and go to sleep, I clicked off the TV and pulled the covers up. The doorbell sounded again. And again. And again. I threw off the covers, put on my bathrobe, and stormed out of the bedroom. If it was a group of kids playing a prank, I told myself, even their parents wouldn't be able to identify their bodies. I unlocked and opened the front door. On the doorstep was a young boy wearing a Native American headdress and an ornately beaded leather vest and pants. He was clutching a bag of candy to his chest. No one else was around. It was unseasonably cold that night, and without any adults around, I couldn't let the kid stay out there and freeze. He looked miserable. I held him by his shoulder and guided him inside. Then I picked him up and placed him on the couch. I didn't know what to do. Calling the police seemed like the only safe bet, so I dialed the non-emergency number. While I waited on hold, I heated up some water to make the kid a mug of hot chocolate. The kid stared at me while I stood in the kitchen. He didn't say a word. I felt bad for the little guy. The receptionist at the police station answered, and I told her what was going on. She said she hadn't heard about any missing kids, but as soon as a car was free, one would be sent over. She cautioned it might be a while, though. Apparently, Halloween's a busy time for them over there. With the water boiled and the instant hot chocolate made, I went over to the kid and sat down next to him on the couch. I placed the mug on the table across from us. After cautioning him that it was hot, I figured I needed to talk to him. "Nice costume," I told him. It wasn't really that nice. Pretty culturally insensitive nowadays, but whatever. "Thanks," he replied. "So, did you lose your parents?" I asked. The kid shook his head. "How about your brothers or sisters or friends?" Again, no. "Want to try the hot chocolate? It's really good." "I don't like chocolate." "Oh, okay." I picked up the mug and started drinking, wondering if the kid was slow or something. Who doesn't like chocolate? We sat in silence for a little while. He kept his eyes on the unpowered television while I did everything in my power to not appear creepy. I never know how to act around kids. "Did you have a good time trick-or-treating?" I asked, then realized it was a stupid question. He'd gotten separated from his family or friends, for fuck's sake. How good could it have been? The kid, to my surprise, nodded. "I got what I wanted," he said. "Oh, and what was that?" The doorbell rang, and I hopped off the couch to answer it. 2 officers. I invited them in and they saw the boy on the sofa. They greeted him and asked him the same questions I had. He had nothing to say to him though. In fact, he looked angry, almost like he hated them. After a few minutes of getting nowhere, the officers said they were going to bring him back to the station. There still hadn't been any reports of a missing child. As they were about to leave, there was a call on the police radio, something about a murder on 113 Chestnut Place. The 3 of us stood very still for a moment. I live at 115 Chestnut. My neighbors, Paul and Lynn Chesney, had lived there for decades and were the curators at a local museum. The officers answered the call on their radio and said they were nearby. They were told backup would be there shortly.
Wait here.
The cops ordered, and the kid and I just looked at each other while the 2 men left the house and headed next door. Don't worry, it's okay, I promised the boy. He looked flat, unaffected. Then he turned and looked straight at me.
Bring this to the MTIC. It all belongs to them.
He handed me his bag. I was extremely confused for a second, wondering why the local Mohegan tribe would want Halloween candy. I opened the bag and gasped. A bloody stone knife sat atop a pile of beautiful beaded vestments, ornate carvings, and other old-looking artifacts.
Your neighbors have been keeping these from us. We tried to get them back, but they laughed and mocked our efforts, but they're too important to give up, especially after we've been forced to give up so much.
I stood like an idiot, holding the bag as sirens approached and the commotion outside grew.
Give it to them!
The kid shouted with a deep adult voice that was entirely out of place coming from his small body, and with that, he vanished. The headdress and pants and vest dropped in a pile on the rug. I spent a good 45 minutes convincing myself that I hadn't gone nuts. Hours later, an officer came back for the boy. What happened over there? I asked the cop. I already knew, but I needed confirmation.
Looks like the couple got killed in a robbery attempt,
he told me.
Their daughter came home from a Halloween party and found them with their throats cut. I'm sorry.
I let out a sigh and nodded.
Where's the kid?
The officer asked. I had an answer ready. There was a family going door to door with a picture of him. I guess he'd run away, but he's back with them now. The cop shook his head.
And they didn't even call us? Christ.
He paused.
Well, okay, good night. I'm sorry about your neighbors. We'll have officers in the area until whoever did it is found.
I thanked him and closed the door. It was almost 5:00 a.m. It was too late to go to bed. I had work in a couple hours. So I sat down at my computer, and with the kid's bag on the desk next to me, I mapped out directions for my drive to the MTIC.